A survey by Redfin says that most Americans support caps on rent. That's Democrats and Republicans overwhelmingly support rent control. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. All right, so I have an interesting article for you today. It has to do with rent control and what the public thinks of it, okay? So Redfin, they did a survey and they asked if people supported caps on rent. And the overwhelming majority, I'm talking about 4 out of every 5 people, apparently, according to their survey, do support rent caps, okay? So they support rent control. Now, I don't know how the survey was worded, and I'm gonna have to look it up and see, what the wording was and what exactly it meant, because I just don't believe it. I just don't believe that the majority of people support rent control, especially when we see there are so many states that have outright banned it, when we see that even in places such as California, when they put rent control up on the ballot, people reject it. I mean, it doesn't make sense if most people support it that it would continually be rejected over and over again, unless the wording of the question itself is misleading. And that's what my guess is, okay? So before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like, subscribe button, maybe leave a comment down below and let me know what you think. Do you believe that the majority of people support caps on rent? Okay, let me think of a way that they could word the question in order to make most people support it. Do you support a cap on rent immediately following a major natural disaster such as a wildfire or a hurricane to make sure that the people who are displaced don't get price gouged? Well, maybe people support some, they are saying, oh yeah, I support a cap on rent in that very specific temporary situation. They didn't ask if people want artificial caps placed on the price of rent forever. No. See, I think that the question itself might be misleading. There might be situations where people do support caps on rent, but I don't think overall people want permanent price controls put in place by the government. And we've seen it time and time again get rejected. Now, certain places, obviously, such as California, New York, etc., have rent control already in place. And I think the reason that is because they have an overwhelming majority of the people who live in their cities that are renters. And so they passed this law because it personally benefits them. But anyway, let me get into the story and tell you what it says. This story is coming from globestreet.com, and it says, most Americans support rent caps. The White House has proposed a federal rent control policy. Yeah, and I've covered, what the terms that the White House supposedly wants to put in place and exactly why I won't be supporting the candidate who wants to put any sort of rent control over landlords. Anyway, let me get into the article. Finally, something nearly all Americans can agree on. Rent increases should be capped. That's the clear result of a Redfin survey, which found 82% of U.S. residents favor limits on how much landlords can raise rents. Within this big picture, there were some differences. Democrats, 86%, were slightly more likely to hold this view than Republicans, 79%. So were renters, 86%, compared to homeowners, 78%. Overall, however, only 7% of the 1,802 people surveyed opposed rent caps. Some states have already taken action to limit rent increases. So I already see some very strange things here, right? Because homeowners in general have been pretty much against rent caps, okay? And while, it seems to me that the percentages are much lower than, it's 79% homeowners compared to 86% of renters. It's not a big enough difference between those two groups unless this study is flawed. It has to be flawed. It absolutely cannot be correct. And you look at the sample size, it's 1,802 people surveyed. Where were those people surveyed from? Okay, is this an online poll? We're talking about Redfin here. This could easily just be an online poll and they just threw it out there. Okay, what you need is a broad survey of people. If you ask people, 1,802 people in New York City or in Los Angeles itself, Democrat, Republican, don't matter. They're going to overwhelmingly support rent control. But if you ask somebody in a small town in Missouri, okay, you're going to get a very, very different answer. And believe me, 1,800 people isn't a big enough sample size, and it's impossible to have any accurate results when we're talking about a country of 330 million people. So this is a flawed survey just from the sample size alone, okay? And us not knowing what the question was, us not knowing where the people came from who responded to it, and us not knowing if this was just an online poll, because people lie on online polls, okay? People will get on, oh, I heard there was a rent control survey, so I hopped on this online poll and I voted 5 times that we support rent control, and I switched my party affiliation, everything, to make it seem like there was more support for rent control than there really is. And they will do that because they're trying to influence, like, politicians. They're trying to change public perception of their cause. And that's why I say this is garbage. This is absolute garbage. And, let me continue though. The survey, conducted in September, comes at a time when rents are consuming a growing share of household budgets, often exceeding 30% of income, even though the excessive supply in some regions is pushing rents down. Redfin noted that the White House in July proposed a federal rent control policy that would limit increases on existing rents to 5%, a move that would require congressional approval. Corporate landlords who exceed this limit would risk losing valuable federal tax breaks, such as faster depreciation write-offs. The legislation would apply to landlords with over 50 units in their portfolio and would affect more than 20 million units nationwide. However, there would be an exception for new construction and substantial renovation or rehabilitation. So, from that last paragraph there, my perception of the question is, did they asked people if they supported caps on rents to prevent these large corporate landlords from being able to price gouge, right? And they didn't ask if people wanted rent control overall, but like I said, the question itself is misleading. And as I also mentioned when I covered the story about what the White House's proposal was, is that it's a slippery slope. It's a slippery slope. We say, hey, we're going to cap the rents on people who own more than 50 houses. And next thing you know, well, you know what? There's still some very, very high rents on people who own less than 50 houses. And then they're like, well, you know what? You got one house and your rents are too high too. So we want to cap your rents as well. Okay. And then next thing you know, all of us, every single landlord is stuck under rent control. All because we allowed it in the first place. That's why we cannot give them an inch. Okay, you give them an inch, they take a mile. You ever heard that saying before? You give them 1 inch, they take a mile. So we gotta stop it. We just gotta cut it down. And even if, like most people in the country support this proposal, I think it's a horrible proposal. Never. You know what? Let the market dictate how much the rent should be. Always. Let the market dictate the rents. Okay, checks and balances are put into place. If somebody charges a rent that's too high, guess what? They won't be able to rent their apartment, and they will be forced to lower the rents. In fact, they even mentioned it in this article. They said that the survey in September comes at a time when rents are growing, and even though the excessive supply in some regions is pushing rents down. They said it right in the article. Excessive supply pushes rents down. That's supply and demand working right there. So rent caps don't make any sense. We just need more supply. How hard is this for them to figure out? Instead of asking these stupid questions, because you know what? Some politicians will use this survey as proof positive that they got to push for rent control. Meanwhile, the majority of the country doesn't want it. They do not want it. They think it's absolute garbage, and they're going to lose everything we're going to lose all our property rights if they put this into place. Okay, it will basically become the government controls everything. Look at those European countries where nobody can afford housing. Why is it that nobody can afford housing? Because the government steps in there and then dictates everything about it. Anyway, if you're interested in this story, I'll put a link to the article in the description down below, and let me know what you think in the comments.